Hi, everyone. Kate, should we start?
Yes, go for it.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to the ones on the West Coast. Welcome to the first one of our UnivAssist Spring webinar series. This one is focused on Europe, and we'll probably be doing one other one on Europe later this thing, but there is a certain reason why we wanted our first one to focus on Europe. It's not on your mind as much as Asia or Southeast Asia or the Middle East, but we definitely need to be thinking Europe. As we encounter changing political environment, the trading relationships being stretched, you know what I'm talking about. Many of the application trends from many countries are being impacted. And from that perspective, Europe has not been on people's priority list. But as a stable geography, I think we should be looking at, whether it can provide another diversity play for all of us. So from that perspective, we wanted to bring in somebody who really knows the region really well. We can't think of a better person to invite. Many of you, if you have been to IACAC, may already know David. David is one of the most respected counselors in the region. He, in terms of his background, he's a graduate of the University of Oxford. He has served as a college and career counselor at the International School of Brussels and also at the Taunton School in the UK. He currently serves on the CIS Forum Planning Committee and also has served on the Government Relations Committee at the International ACAC. So I thought it would be best for us to hear from him what makes Europe attractive, as the political environment changes. Also, to provide his perspective on the fact that Europe is great to recruit not only European students, but also students from other countries who are actually going to high school in Europe. So without much ado, I hand it over to you, David, and looking forward to a great discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Swaraj. I'll just load up the presentation, and Kate or Swaraj, if you can let me know that it can be seen once I've done so, just so I make sure that everyone can see what we're supposed to be seeing. Okay, the presentation should be there. Is it actually available for people to see? Fantastic, great. So it's my great pleasure to be able to spend some time today talking to you about Europe, giving some insight into the trends that I'm seeing as a counsellor working with students in Europe who aspire to complete their university degree elsewhere, and possibly also to encourage you to advocate for recruitment in Europe to your managers, to your deans, your vice presidents. And a particular point I do want to emphasize, building on what Swaraj has just said, is to look beyond the open doors data in terms of where students are coming from in terms of the country of their passport, and actually think about the country where students are educated. I work with about 50 students a year, supporting them directly with their international applications. And about 3/4 of those are not actually European passport holders. These are students who are globally mobile, who have chosen to attend a school in Europe for their education, but are not necessarily going to be staying in Europe. And that's something I really want to touch on. So I'm starting off with a photo of Hogwarts here. I think everyone will recognize the castle here, but trying to use this as a way of understanding that a large part of recruitment in Europe really should focus on the boarding school sector. The boarding school sector within Europe, and particularly within the United Kingdom, is a really substantial one. Some very historic institutions, which in the same way as universities have massively diversified their student body over the last 20 years or so by recruiting international students, boarding schools have done the same. And to the extent actually now that the biggest source of international students heading to universities within the United Kingdom are UK boarding schools. So there are more international students applying to UK universities from the UK than from any other country. There's another statistic that UCAS put out relatively recently that soon there will be more Chinese students applying from UK schools to UK universities than there will be Welsh students applying to UK universities from UK schools. So the numbers really are quite staggering, and it's a sort of hidden market, I think, that a lot of international university recruiters aren't tapping into. Another thing to bear in mind with recruiting these students from the boarding school sector is also that a lot of the work that you might traditionally have to do with students on your campuses, whether that's building up their level of English, whether that's teaching those students the particular cultural rules of interacting with professors, with issues perhaps to do with integration with other cultures, possibly even things like academic honesty, that these issues have already been dealt with at the schools that we would be visiting were you to come and recruit with us in Europe in the fall. So these are students who are globally mobile, who are integrated into an Anglo-centric education model, and who aspire to a future that is going to be not necessarily within the UK. So just to give you some figures for that in terms of the UK, which I'll focus on for the first half of the presentation, is that we have a huge number of students within the UK, a highly populous country with a massive demographic bulge just going through the system now of more and more UK students. We have a massive school building program in the UK at the moment, and there is going to be a demographic issue for UK universities in the next 5 to 10 years of issues with capacity of fitting those students in. Now, we have a university sector that can do that, but what you are going to start to see is students who, if they were applying now, could have expected to get a university place at a particular reputation or prestige level of university. If they were applying in 5 or 10 years or so, they are unlikely to be able to have those same opportunities, purely because we have more students coming through the system. So you'll see in the information here that we have the total number of pupils has grown every year since 2009 and will continue to grow over the next decade or so. So students who aspire to a well-regarded university course are going to have to look slightly more globally because they're going to end up seeing some capacity issues within the UK. Now, focusing on that in a little bit more detail, I want to focus on the boarding school sector. And as I've explained, this is a sector which I think is ripe for recruitment from international universities coming to the UK to recruit students. So on 2018 figures, there were over 500,000 students being educated privately within the UK, paying a fee on average of £15,000 a year for tuition for day students. But if they're a boarding student and adding in room and board, that's 33,000. But some of the more well-known schools, places like Harrow and Eton that you might have heard of, are going to be significantly higher than that. And so therefore, these are students who have significant disposable income within their families and also a commitment to paying for education. And those are the families who at the moment are already starting to look to North America as a study destination and are only going to do so increasingly more over the years to come. Now, within that sector then of the 500,000 students being privately educated, we've got over 75,000 of these who are either international or who have parents who live overseas. That latter point is quite important because the way that the fees work for students studying at UK universities is not solely dependent on passport. So if you are British, but your your child lives outside currently the European Union, but potentially with Brexit outside of the UK, you are paying the same international fee, potentially £25,000 or £30,000, as if you were a student from China or Hong Kong. So that international figure of 75,000 students is 75,000 students who are going to be paying a lot of money just to stay in the UK. Now, from that 75,000, we see we've got significant numbers from China and Hong Kong as the two biggest groups, but many other countries in there as well. I think a really interesting thing that's very unknown is actually the United States is the third biggest number of international students at these boarding schools. And all of those students really aren't served in terms of access to US higher education opportunities. So that there's a significant American population here in the UK right now who would be at least open to the idea of studying in the United States. The private school sector is particularly top heavy in terms of when students attend a private school. So 16% of the school age population, age 17 or 18, are going to a private school, was actually across the whole sector, it's about 8% of the school age population go to private school. So as students reach those crucial last 2 years of their education, more families choose to invest in a private school education. Now, within then those students in the private school sector who are looking to go to an international university, the US is head and shoulders the most attractive destination for them. And increasingly, and the reason I'm able to do the work that I do is that more and more UK private schools are having to learn how to support their students. So in the last data from the Independent Schools Council survey, 61% of all UK private schools had at least one student pursuing university outside the UK, and the list that they were going to was almost 500 different universities. So taking that same data from the Independent Schools Council survey in the UK, this is of the students who chose to study outside of the UK, where did they go? And it's fairly obvious from here that US is by far the most attractive destination. So for students at UK private schools who are looking to not go to a UK university, the US is trumping all other options in terms of where they would choose to go. Now, interestingly, when you break it down into which of the top 10 universities that you went to, yes, you will see some well-known and named universities in here, but interestingly, some universities which may not immediately trip off the tongue. But also the fact that actually these percentages are still not that high. So students are going to a wide range of universities, and though these are the top 10, I think the fact that you can see the University of Pennsylvania on there will show actually just how diverse this group is going to be, because the University of Pennsylvania will not be taking many students outside of the UK to hit the top 10. One of the interesting things for me, reflecting back on my career, is to see Northeastern in third place here, knowing that Northeastern for a decade or so have engaged very significantly with the UK boarding school sector, have spent significant amounts of time visiting a wide range of UK boarding schools, and are seeing the results of that work now in the fact that the brand name that Northeastern has within the UK puts it in probably a higher tier than actually it might have were you discussing Northeastern and its peer group within the United States. More recently, we have QS, Quagga-Willie-Simmons, having done a survey of UK students. These are 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. And this was looking at their own motivations and interests in terms of what they were going to do when they finished high school. So 75% of students within the UK were saying, yes, I want to go to the UK, but actually 25% are considering another study destination. And again, you'll see on the second point here that of those study destinations, the United States was the most popular one. Now, this does reflect trends in other parts of the world, but again, there is significant latent demand sitting within the UK student body to have greater access and awareness of the opportunities to study in the United States. Kate and Swaj, I said I'd pause there if we had any particular questions about the UK. Have you had anything come in that I should pause and address?
Not yet, David. We haven't seen anything, but this is great. I hope people are really absorbing this productive information.
Fantastic, great. Well, I think the final point I'll make on the UK is that the same thing that you will see in your offices and universities, going out around the world and recruiting students and going to fairs, those of you who might be dealing with commission-based agents and having to deal with those things, UK boarding schools are doing exactly the same efforts. And an increasing trend that I'm seeing in the recruitment of students to come to boarding schools within the UK is to talk about the international universities program they have. We're seeing more and more UK schools set up as SAT or ACT test centres. Increasingly, students are having to find more and more opportunities to pursue these pathways by working with people like myself and other independent counsellors, because they are aspiring to do this. So it really is a growing trend. So to step away then from the UK and focus more broadly on Europe, the other aspect, and I think again a hidden area of recruitment that people aren't looking at, are the European international schools. And I think this is where most noticeably we have the difference between country of passport and country of education, in that we see, particularly in the current political trends in Europe, a move towards the second tier European cities with a real massive growth in the international school sector. Partly due to relocation of lots of European Council and European Union agencies outside of the UK to other cities, but also as more and more local families within these areas want to access international education. So whereas maybe a generation ago, a family moving from the US or from India or from Hong Kong or Australia to work for a multinational company in a second tier city might have either chosen to send their child to a boarding school back in their home country or to put them through the local system, we're now seeing more and more small international schools opening up in these cities to serve that needs of the population. In particular, what we're seeing is not just the growth of the US pattern international schools, or indeed the IB pattern international schools, but actually something which I really think that US universities are missing out in recruiting from, which is the COBIS schools, the Council of British International Schools. Now, increasingly, those schools are setting up. You'll be aware of some of the partnership models, so brands like Haileybury and Dulwich and Harrow, which have opened up their schools in Asia. A lot of those groups are also opening up schools now across continental Europe. And the King's group of schools, which is an international school group itself, recently opened a new school in Frankfurt and are indeed looking at other opportunities within continental Europe. The Nord Anglia group as well has just opened up an international school in Dublin. So we're seeing that there are a huge number of British pattern schools on the European continent with their students looking beyond the UK for university. In the context then also of Brexit and the political uncertainty that we're seeing, the UK may become a much more expensive option, or because of the political uncertainty, an option which students aren't looking to consider. So at a British pattern school on the continent of Europe, students who may automatically have historically looked to the UK will now be looking for other English-speaking destinations for university. And particularly when the fee level may equalise a little bit more, and when we start to look at the more top end, some courses at places like Oxford and Cambridge will be a headline figure of £40,000 to £50,000 a year tuition. We can see how the financial disincentives, which I think some people might have assumed have been there, will suddenly come away. So as I've mentioned, these geopolitical factors and economic developments are having a huge infrastructure change in there as to where people are going from. And the ISC Research, who are an international schools research organisation who pull huge amounts of data to put into their portal, published last year their Western Europe Market Intelligence Report with a detailed look at these cities that's going on. And I think what is particularly interesting in there is how Northwest Europe is really growing. So Frankfurt, I think, has historically been a key destination, but more and more schools are going in Frankfurt. The Frankfurt International School did a massive amount of investment over the last 3 years and have hit their capacity. And now there are not enough spots for Deutsche Bank relocating a lot of its employees back to Frankfurt. And there will almost certainly be new international schools going up in Frankfurt very quickly. But other places like Amsterdam, like Antwerp, like Dusseldorf, like Bonn, and also Brussels are seeing similar growth in their international school sector. There is quite an interesting amount of consolidation in that sector with private companies, not just Nord Anglia and the King's Group, but also one called Illuminated coming out of Italy, who are seeking to tap into this market. And again, these students who are going there will not necessarily be Dutch students or Belgian students or German students, that these will be third country nationals, globally mobile students, and with high net worth or ultra high net worth families who aspire to a global education for their children. Now, within this, though, it's also important to understand the level of the academics that these students are recruiting. And this is the second point in terms of why I think it's important that people come to Europe and recruit these students, is that because the models of higher education, of secondary education within Europe typically are a year longer than the US model. So in the UK, we would go reception to year 13 rather than K through 12 for the United States. Is not only are these students globally mobile, very ambitious for themselves, and are culturally integrated into an Anglo-centric school of education, they are also very well qualified. You may be aware of the A-level model by hearing about Cambridge, but the A-level model across the British pattern schools in Europe and the UK is incredibly highly regarded. And the students who are coming through an A-level model will be excellent students coming into your universities. The IB diploma program similarly, so I'm sure that's something you're very familiar with. But three other qualifications which are definitely growing within the UK and Europe at the moment, which are also an opportunity for universities with particularly different programs that you may want to find good candidates for or may not be aware of. So an important one that we're seeing in the UK at the moment is growth of the BTEC. And the BTEC, I think, historically has been seen by international universities as a vocational program, equivalent to maybe someone learning to be a plumber or a bricklayer or a car mechanic. Actually, in the UK, that's a different qualification. We call that City and Guilds. BTEC is what we would call applied technical education. Now, interestingly, a BTEC student is going to be following a model of education very similar to US high school diploma. It's cumulative assessment, there's limited focus on terminal exams, and students are going to be graded on their day in, day out performance in class. And we're seeing a massive growth of this applied technical education within the UK as students want to focus more on the STEAM subjects. And rather than just learning the theory and potentially aspiring to go to a traditional university like Oxford, Cambridge or Imperial, the students want to combine that theory with a practical level of education as well. I look to more the polytechnics and the applied sciences universities by having a combination of theory and practice. At the other end of this, we're also seeing the introduction of a suite of qualifications called Pre-U, also indeed run by Cambridge Examinations. And these are actually a group of qualifications which are designed to go beyond A-levels. Not offered by a huge number of schools within the UK, but they are the most academically selective high schools that we have here. And for universities that really are looking to recruit an academic top end, the pre-U qualification is one that a number of schools are offering, and has a very interesting philosophy behind it of keeping students globally minded and aspiring to those universities. The final one is the IB career related program, the IBCP. And if you're not familiar with that program, again, it's an awful lot of growth coming there, particularly in parts of the UK where we still have a binary education system of grammar schools and secondary moderns. The IB career program takes elements of the IB diploma, particularly some of the subjects, but also combines it with an applied technical qualification. So a lot of people will do an IB career related program, including a BTEC, but there are other options. And I know the Savannah College of Art and Design offer a course that can be put in part of the IB career program. But these are something which is massively growing at international schools, British pattern schools in Europe, and indeed in the UK school sector. So there's an awful lot of things in there that students could be aware of. Now, different schools within the UK and internationally within Europe are offering different combinations of these qualifications. And it's important, therefore, to not view Europe or the UK as a monolithic group of high schools. And certainly, as I've said, to not look at these countries as only coming to recruit passport holders for those countries. I see, particularly within the European university sector that I do a lot of work with, a real sense of targeted recruitment. So particular universities from one country or consortia of universities like the European Universities Consortium are targeting particular profile schools in terms of the nationalities at their schools, in terms of the price that students are paying to attend those schools, and the curricular offering that that school has, and are seeing huge success in recruiting those students out of the UK. I would say certainly if Bocconi University from Milan and IE University in Spain and the Dutch University Consortiums are investing huge amounts of their time to come to the UK and recruit British students, if universities like Trinity College Dublin, like École Hôtelière de Lausanne are also investing time to come to the UK and recruit those students, the US is missing a trick by not doing the same. You can come to Europe and you can recruit these globally mobile students and recruit the world, and really actually add a very distinctive flavour to the student bodies that you are bringing in. So to that end, I should probably do a little bit of promotion as that to support you in your efforts to come in to do this. I'm working with Swaraj and the team at KIC to put together a tour to visit some of these places. You'll see we are going to see some key cities and start the tour in London, but also to get those on the tour out of this pattern of just visiting these top tier cities, to go out and spend some time visiting the boarding school sector in the UK, some very well-known schools in the UK with significant populations of international students in there, and then also to tap into some of the growing markets in Northwest Europe by looking at Brussels and Northwest Germany. We really feel that there is a great opportunity to add a very distinctive flavour to your student recruitments, to bring in high quality, very ambitious students who are either nationals of these countries who aspire to a international university future, or indeed are third country nationals who find themselves being educated in Europe or the UK, who then are really attracted to the idea of US university study. These are the list of the schools that we're going to be visiting in the UK. When I show this to friends in the UK, they know this is a very impressive list of schools, and each of these are schools which have a significant and growing interest in studying outside the UK. They're schools which I have a relationship with. I either work with their students or I deliver workshops to their students or their faculty. And schools which are offering a combination of different curricula, but are at a price point and have a cultural hinterland to them, which are really pushing their students to consider the US as a destination of study. And then we'll hop over to Europe and we'll look at some schools in Brussels and Northwest Germany. And in between that, are just tying up the last few visits now to make that a very worthwhile series of visits. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand back to Swaraj and Kate for some presentations, but just to leave you with an image of Shrewsbury School here and actually an issue at the back of their counselling office. And just to make the point that as well as coming to visit these schools, you'll also learn a lot about the culture, and finishing with Shrewsbury School because it's actually the school that Charles Darwin went to school. So if you wanted to see where he first hatched the ideas of the origin of species, we can also see those things on the tour as well.
Well, thank you so much, David. That was actually, you're bang on time because we had said that we would take 25 minutes to do this and, to keep enough time for questions. Just to round that up, first of all, it's fantastic for us that David is helping lead the whole thing, not only in terms of selecting the schools that the tour will be going to, but actually he has the perspective of how we can add the most value as visiting US universities to the students in these countries, and so we are very excited about that. But as we look at Europe, I think another thing to think about is, as some of our predominant countries of focus from a recruitment standpoint, start to either top out or start to decline a little bit, where are the markets of the future? And two, also from a diversity standpoint, what is our classroom going to look like? And if we want adequate representation, we can't really leave Europe out. And thirdly, there's been a lot of talk about visa denials. And I think that's another key piece that we have to focus on from an ROI of our effort standpoint, is which are the US friendly nations as well as regions where, we can be sort of sure of, once we give an admit out and once the student enrolls, that they will actually land up on campus. So from all those perspectives, I think Europe is a great solution. And I think people who have been engaging with Europe have been very successful. I just don't think from a US standpoint, enough of us are in the market, at any point in time. So I'm hoping that you will join us. But again, this was the first thing, and then let's open it up to questions.
I would add to ours as well. I think that a lot of people kind of dip their toes into Europe, and we'll put a little stop in London and visit maybe the international schools in London and move on again and think, well, I've done Europe. I think if you're going to come and do Europe, that actually you need to think of London as actually a separate country. London is in many ways the 51st state, and it's a different kind of recruitment strategy there. So if you have had experiences in Europe and it's only been a bit of London or maybe a bit of Paris, please do speak to us and find a little bit more about these sectors that we're talking about, because I think if you are prepared to look a little bit more creatively in Europe, you will find that there are huge avenues here to really diversify your student body.
Yeah, great. And I know Alex had some suggestion, and we'll definitely take that into account, Alex. We are still 6 months from the tour, and as you can see, almost 80% of the schools are already finalized. So I think it's going to be a phenomenal opportunity to engage with the region. So we are really looking forward to it. Any questions? Well, Alex had a question here, David. She says, what do you find are the most attractive features of studying in the US to British students?
I think that the key thing that actually attracts most students, and I'll expand it from not just British, but students who are being British educated to study in the US, is the much broader opportunities of studying at university. The UK model of university was built on an idea that only 10% of the population would go to university, and therefore the model is that you will know what you want to study for the 3 years of your university degree at the time at which you apply to university. So students at UK schools are almost really from the age of 16 having to track towards 1 or 2 subjects at university. So when I say I studied history at the University of Oxford, it wasn't that I majored in history. All I studied for 3 years was history. Now that suited me, and I was very well fitted to that system. But actually, there are many students in the United Kingdom who don't know what they want to study at age 17 when they apply to university. So a broader model of education is the first thing that really attracts them. I think on a slightly bigger policy level as to why are some of these schools actually very interested in their students studying in the US, is that actually the product that the UK boarding school is selling to its prospective clients, its parents, is a very similar product that US universities are selling to prospective clients, to your students, in that we're talking about education being more than just going to class and getting good grades. That the schools that we'll be visiting on the UK tour will have strong music departments and drama departments. They want their students to be involved in athletics. They focus on strong relationships with your professors and the idea of a holistic education. And those heads of school and school leaders will look at the UK university sector and say, well, we can't see that in the UK university sector. But when they look at the US university sector, they see it and go, well, it's the same decision. And actually, there's some research that's been done on this, that the decisions that British families and families choosing British education make at age 13 or 14 to send their child to a UK private school is actually the very same decision that a lot of US families are making at age 17 or 18 to send their child to a particular type of college. They want something that they can't find really in the focus just on academics. So from the school leadership point of view, there's a real motivation to say that our students have been very successful in a style of education, and we want them to continue with that style of education, but the UK university sector doesn't deliver that.
Great, thanks. There's one other question from Alex saying, are UK students most drawn to residential universities?
Yeah, and I will also mention about the umlaut. I did mention, as someone who studied German A-level, I noticed the umlaut as well. So yes, it should have the umlaut or an E. Yes, I think they will be mostly drawn to residential universities. I think we've got two issues there. The one is just the fact of the ease of the situation in terms of someone who is traveling a significant area to come, they will want to have that safety net there. I think there's also going to be sometimes the issues in terms of mum and dad as well, worrying about the campus safety. The news media that you in the United States consume about the UK is obviously going to be reflected through a certain lens, and unfortunately campus safety and university safety in the United States is one that we see in the news over here through the lens in which we perceive stuff. So knowing that people can study on a campus and live on a campus is a crucial part of that journey. And particularly as we're saying that the students whom you may be meeting with on the tour will not actually be British. They have come to study in a residential school in the UK, and that will be the expectation that the family would have for their next step.
Great, great. Any other last questions that you may have for David? I don't see any, and we are right on time. So I then, on behalf of Kate, and all of UnivAssist, wanted to thank all of you in joining us, and also specifically to David to join us as the guest speaker. We're really looking forward to a fantastic fall, David, and we will be doing one other webinar, so you have another chance to get your questions once you have had a chance to absorb all this, discuss it internally. So we'll plan that in maybe 4 to 6 weeks. But thank you again for joining, and have a wonderful day.
And I also want to put a quick plug in that we'll be doing a spring webinar series. There's one coming up on India and another one coming up on Latin America. And then, as Faraj mentioned, another one on Europe after that. So keep an eye out for those.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.